Welcome to another unboxing. And actually this will be more of a flip through, but we will be unboxing something. Today we're going to take a look at Oathmark, Battles of the Lost Age by Joseph A. McCullough, published by Osprey. And after this, we're also going to take a look at a set of the North Star miniatures, specifically made for this game, so you can get an idea of how the official miniatures look for this game. And they're built, the base sizes, everything is built exactly to fit the troops and everything in here. So let's take a look. So this game was it was released in 2020 originally, so it was one of my pandemic purchases, and I was looking through all my old Warhammer Fantasy and everything, how I was going to build armies with it, because it is generic fantasy. So almost any, and of course, like most of McCullough's games, miniatures agnostic. So you can use any miniatures that you want for the game. It just specifies the 25mm bases, square bases, because it's rank and flank style fantasy battles. And so it was, very compelling. I was very interested in this system. But of course, because it was the pandemic, there was no one to get together with, and I didn't, no one to play with, and so I didn't get an army together. But just recently, if you've been watching the channel, Chris and I just started our, what we're doing is an escalation campaign where we start small. We started with the learning game of 550 points, and we'll just gradually increase that, as well as the board size each battle, as we learn the game and kind of tweak our armies and play exactly what we want to be playing. And this game lends itself very well to not only very narrative play, but also being able to not be stuck with, so if you're playing dwarves, you're slow. If you're playing orcs or goblins, you're not very controllable. The activations are very questionable. So we wanted to have a game where you weren't really stuck with the limitations of the faction that you chose, and this is perfect for that, and we'll see a bit about that as we get to the kingdom building. So let's take a quick look. So here's the contents, and just an introduction of what is wargaming, and then playing the game. You go over figures, unit sizes, the officer, units of one, line of sight, setting the table, then the turn, initiative, and activation, and actions during the turns. And it's alternating activation, which is nice, and which is different from most of the kind of classic style, Mordheim or fantasy battles. And then combat rules, shooting attacks, morale, and then the advanced rules, which we haven't gotten very much into yet because we've started so small. Things like splitting the units, monsters, artillery, and then here's the thing that really sets this game apart. As far as, because you could play the old rules of War Master or Warhammer Fantasy, or even Kings of War, or some of the more modern kind of remakes of that. But this gives this game its unique flavor, which is creating a kingdom. So in this book, the factions are dwarf, human, elf, goblin, and orc, kind of combined. And then there are unaligned terrains, which mostly give you access to monsters and creatures, so they don't have to be under a specific kingdom. So then assembling the army, and they give you figure lists. And then also in here are campaigns. So the game can be played in just one-off individual matches, but I think the real strength of it comes from the campaign, and a lot of the narrative elements come from the campaign. So you determine, after, of course, the army size, the number of points, and the table size that you'll be using, then the scenario and battle type. And you can roll for those. There's tables in here that we'll see. And so the scenarios are just very basic ones in the book. And then the supplements, of course, have expanded that to a much further degree, as well as adding new faction and new spells and things usually come up as well. And here's in the appendices, the first one is special abilities, and then Appendix B gives you your spell lists. And there are general spells that all spellcasters can take, and then there are spells specific to your faction. And then, of course, also magic items, which, if you got the points, you can use to buff or give extra abilities to specific units, usually characters. So the introduction goes, once a great battlefield, the rocky hills, fields of the marches, are now remembered only in burnt fragments of parchment and moldy, forgotten books. Warlords used fire and sword to carve out kingdoms and led campaigns of war and conquest in the shadows of ruined empires. It is an age in which men, elves, dwarves, goblins, and others lived and worked together, giving their oath marks to whomever stood strongest, and carving their pledges in standing stone, ancient trees, and even the bones of their enemies. An age of destruction and strife, an age of blackguards and heroes, an age lost to time. So very, of course, and there's great art in this the book as well. So a very kind of standard lost lost kingdom fantasy setting, and so the official miniatures are very much feel like they're based on the artwork that's in the book. So it's really it's a very nice touch, and the book itself is beautiful. There's lots of nice little details, and it's laid out really well and easy to use when you're playing. I didn't some of the older wargaming books, I found there's a lot of unnecessary flipping. You're doing a lot of strange strange things to try to get your fingers in all the right places in the book. But this is organized very well. And of course, McCullough has the benefit of all the mistakes of organization in previous games. So describing the miniatures you need, saying you don't have to have any specific miniatures, although there are Oathmark official miniatures, and all of the bases are for a standard figure are 25 by 25, and then of course cavalry and larger monsters and things all vary. And the intention is to rank these in rows of 5. So a full rank is 5 figures, and I think we'll see that coming up. And then the table, so our first battle we actually played on a 2x4 table. And quickly you'll go up to a standard 4x6. But that worked pretty well because we didn't have many units, and they barely, if we would have been on even a 4x4, we would have it would have been impossible to come into contact with each other within the limited rounds of the game. So it worked well. And there's rules for terrain, and I think those have gotten expanded as well. And what you're doing is you're rolling usually 2d10. So d10s are necessary, and it's good to have usually you'll have to have probably up to 5, and then an additional one, so maybe a 6th die that's a different color, because occasionally you'll be rolling the champion die. The champion die has different rules, so you need to know which one that is as you're rolling it. So half a dozen d10s will do it. And aside from that, there's no other, maybe the tables. The tables may be d6 tables. No, I wouldn't think he would do that, but I don't think you'll need anything but a d10, and everything is in inches, of course. And then there's a kingdom and army sheets, and the kingdom sheet is the thing where you can really decide, where you want to go with your army. And so here is an example stat line. Get a little bit closer here. So as you can see, if you're used to Warhammer Fantasy or any of the other War Master, any of the other games, it's a nice kind of reduced or kind of scaled down stat line that gives you just about everything. So leadership and all of the other things are kind of combined under activation. So you have activation, movement, fight, shoot, defense, combat dice, and then health, and then of course the cost in points, and then special is any abilities that the unit has. And then another nice thing is base size. So you're always, dealing with 25 millimeter bases ranked in 5. So that works well to have things, matching, and everyone's moving the same and everything. All right. So it's a nice refinement and some more great art. So here we're talking about the units. So, 1 to 20. So ranks of 4, ranked at 25 millimeter bases in 5 per row. Cavalry is usually 25 by 50, and 1 to 10 figures, 2 rows of 5. And 50 are large creatures such as trolls, and those are 1 to 3 in their configuration. And 50 by 100 is only for the largest monsters such as dragons, and they're probably going to be not ranked just by themselves. And then there's of course mixed base sizes. There may be some opportunity to mix base sizes into different units, but that gives you an idea. And you can only take so many of, you have a limit to how many of each unit you can take within your army. So you can't just spam an entire horde of very cheap units. You're limited. And then of course there's an officer. So basically, here's a nice example of that. So you're ranked in rows of 5. The center position of the first rank will be the leader or officer of that unit. So they should be, just to make it a little bit easier, visually a little bit different. Holding a sword up or a banner or something that can, because you're measuring, as you can see from how this is drawn, your front arc, and you're measuring, and even your maneuvering when you're wheeling or pivoting is based on knowing where that center is. And then that also determines, if you're flanked or anything, those are your side arcs. And then, of course, the rear. So elven archer. And then line of sight. So line of sight is important, and there's an ability that lets you see over friendly units, and so you can fire or cast over friendly units. But line of sight is important to be able to draw, and has very specific rules. So because you're using this leader, this officer, as your point of measurement, so you have to be able to see, to shoot at something, you have to be able to see the leader and then 2 others, so at least 3 of the first rank for that to be line of sight. And so other units being in the way without your ability to shoot over things makes that impossible. And so turns and initiative, and of course you're rolling. Oh, and the nice thing about initiative too, you aren't just rolling 1 die each, and if it's a tie, then rolling again, a tie, rolling again. You roll 2d10 for initiative. Whoever has the highest die roll wins. If it's a tie, then you go to the next die, whoever has the highest of those 2. So it prevents a lot of re-rolling for initiative. I've seen systems where people can, like 2 or 3 times in a row, especially when you're rolling d6s, hit the same number again and again. So 2d10 is a really nice way to roll initiative. And there's rules, of course, for more than 2-player games, so multiplayer games, and they suggest either alliances or chaos, which 3-player games usually do end up in chaos because they're very unbalanced. And there's some dwarves. Yeah, so this art is also used on the boxes, as we'll see, for the North Star miniatures. So activation is first it's a roll. So you use that stat, and you're rolling. What are you doing? You're rolling over that stat, I believe. Let's go back to our. It'll probably say right here. So equal to. So you roll 2d10, and if anything's equal to or greater than the unit's activation stat, then you can give them an order. You can move them. So if you fail activation, what happens is you only get a simple action. So every turn, you get 2 actions: a move and then something else, like a shoot or two movements, obviously. And if you fail your activation, you get a single action, which can't be anything very advanced. It's basically just move or shoot. So if you're not engaged, you don't do much. And so actions, with few exceptions, there's the list of actions. So, of course, like you said, move, and then they talk about obstructions and types of terrain, maneuver, so the pivot, and then the wheel from the corner. Yeah, pivot is from the center, your leader, your officer. And then shooting, and then special abilities, and then simple actions. If a unit fails its activation, it may only make one simple action during this activation. Simple activations include maneuvers, move actions, but can't move you into contact with the enemy, and shooting. So you're restricted to just a single thing, which is good because I believe with War Master, when you failed your activation, you did nothing. And Chris was playing Undead, I believe, which are a little unruly and don't activate easily. So a lot of times the army wasn't doing anything. So it's a little bit frustrating to have an army just standing still because it's disobedient, just because you rolled, your leadership, your activation low. So it's very good. So here's the explanation of combat, and a much more simplified kind of movement and engaging than other systems, and especially Warhammer Fantasy. So once you move into contact, then you just align with the side of the unit that you've actually made contact with. So determine the front, front or side flank, and then you just move the units so that the leaders are aligned, or that the leader is aligned with the center of that unit. So much more simplistic, much less guesswork, and kind of you can't kind of play with the system and play with the mechanics to get advantage with someone that doesn't know the system as well. It's a nice refined system. So in combat, you're rolling your number of combat dice, but the maximum number of combat dice is always 5. So there are, and that's determined by how many are in the front rank of your unit. If it's a unit of 1, they usually have a combat dice stat that's more than 1. So usually rolling a few of those, and those champions or princes or kings can be or captains can be included in your unit, and it doesn't their number of combat dice doesn't come into question or come into effect until your unit is whittled down to only that unit, or maybe 1 or 2 others. So you're rolling only a maximum of 5 dice, and then there's a series of combat modifiers. So depending then on how many, so rolling 5 dice and trying to hit a target number. The target number is determined by either your shoot or your fight stat, subtracted from the defense of the unit you're attacking. So that's the target number, and then you move it up or down, depending on how many full ranks you have beyond the first. If you're tanking the flank or the rear, if you have a non-active unit that is already activated, if you're defending in the rear arc, if the unit is disordered, if the unit is fighting from lower elevations, and also if the unit has moved into combat with an enemy behind defensive fortifications. So these all affect that target number and either make it easier or harder to successfully hit. And some humans. And so you roll the combat dice, maximum of 5, and then there's also charging rolls as well. And then if the number that you roll on any of the dice is equal to or exceeds the target number, that's a hit. But if you go beyond the target number by 5, that one success is 2 hits, and then if you go beyond 10, that's 3 hits. So if there's a way to really reduce the defense, or if you're hitting very weak defense units, you could possibly roll 10 over what you needed, so that each success on the dice would be 3 hits. But usually it's just 1, and almost all of the individual figures are one hit point. So 1 hit usually takes out one soldier from each unit. And then you apply the hits and then remove your casualties. So this isn't, I believe Kings of War, you're keeping track more with dice because you can have kind of diorama type bases of figures, but this is removing figures from trays, so much more old school in that way. And then you take morale tests based on who was attacked and how many figures they lost. And also, if you're engaged and doing combat, you're rolling both ways. So both units have the ability to do damage. With ranged attacks, it's a more of a one-way thing, relying on your shielding. But if if you're engaged in combat, you're doing simultaneous attacks, and then some morale tests for lost figures, and then the pushback determining who won, who got the most casualties, then can either push you back 1 or 6 inches, depending on what they want to do with that. And usually if it's a tie, then both units go back an inch. So here's stat line examples for human and dwarf. And shielding, the ability of shielding basically reduces the attack by 1. You take 1 of the combat dice that's rolled away. If the unit has shielding, so they're rolling 4 instead of 5, but that doesn't affect the target number. All right, and then shooting attacks, so line of sight, range, and priority. And of course, you can't, unless you have a shoot over ability, you have to target. There are abilities that let you do this, but you usually have to target the closest. And as you can see from the ranges, We're dealing with 20 inches for bows, 22 for elven bows. Slings are 12, light catapult is 32, heavy catapult 40, ballista 30, and fire breath is 12. So those are all the ranged attacks. So that was the thing I had to get used to, is seeing dwarves holding bows. That was a very different thing for me. I was expecting crossbows or something, but no, so the technology is limited to the bow and the sling, and then of course the ballistas and war machines, but no black powder and no crossbows. So the same style, but you're not simultaneously attacking with the ranged attack, and then determining the number of hits, removing the casualties, and doing the morale tests. But the difference is with the morale test that the target that you're rolling is one less if it's a ranged attack, because it's not as terrifying. It's people slashing at you with axes when you just have a cloud of arrows. And so then they give you an example of the shooting attacks. And here's morale. And these are the things that affect your morale roll. So the number of casualties suffered, that brings you down 1 for each. If the unit is disordered, that's down. If it contains less than 1 full rank, you're down 1 more. If the unit contains at least 2 complete ranks, you get +1. So +1 beyond the first rank. And the unit contains 1 complete rank, and with the figures that are 25 by 50 or 50 by 50 is +1, and then morale due to shooting attack. So there's the shooting attack is less scary. All right, and then if you fail the attack, you become disordered, which means that you receive a -1 on activations, and then you also suffer +1 to target numbers with combat modifiers and shooting modifiers, and -1 on all morale tests from that point on. But there are things like command rolls and things that can help you to bring it back under control. So here you get there's a photo, give you an idea of the ranked units. And so here's a unit of 1, so a commander or a spellcaster is usually that way, and then here's your different infantry and more orkiness. So advanced rules, which we haven't gotten quite into on our campaign yet, but characters. So you can have characters, and also there are rules then for renown. So characters, and I believe units as well, can have renown, and so that gives them benefits, and from each of their victories they kind of grow and develop. So commanders have a command ability, which allows them to bring the disordered back under control. Champions are the figures that, if they're in a unit, give you the ability to roll the champion die. And so what the champion die it does, it's just a D10, but of a different color. And if you're rolling that, and if you score a hit, normally it would be 1. Champion die is it gives you 2 instead of 1. So every successful hit on a champion die is 2. It scores you 2 hits instead of 1. And if the result is 10, the player that rolled the champion dice that may make a choice. They can either apply it to the enemy unit or specifically to directly to the officer. And so losing an officer is also another. It can cause a lot of damage to the unit and potentially rout it. So it may be good in some instances to target the officer of a large unit. And so here's the description of champion in combat. And here's, death of an officer. So if you do take advantage, if you roll a 10 on the champion die and you do specifically target their officer, what happens is you roll a 1 die morale test, an activation. So players will roll only 1 die. So after you lose your officer from your unit, your morale tests are reduced to 1 die, unless somebody contains the command ability. So it makes you much more likely to become disordered and not be very effective in a fight. So a unit may only suffer 1 death of an officer per game, regardless of how many officers or characters would be in that unit. And then spellcasting. So spellcasting has, similar to Frostgrave, it has a target number that you must roll for the spell to go off, and then some spells then generate a ranged attack, and so or a shooting attack, and so you then have to roll the dice for that shooting attack. And casting numbers, of course. Interesting thing is if you are a level 1 caster, or whatever your level is for caster, that's how many dice you roll to successfully cast a spell. And it's also how many spells you can learn. So that's very interesting. The way that they make higher level casters more powerful is because they have a much better chance of getting their spells off, so they can use higher level spells, though the spells with higher casting numbers are more easy to achieve because you're rolling so many more dice. So the spellcaster ability is what all of those specific units will have. But they may never attempt to cast a spell if they are within 2 inches of an enemy unit. So they need to stay back and protected. All right. And with the D10 system, regardless of the bonuses and deductions that you're making for any of these targeting numbers, a roll of a 10, natural 10, is always a success. So I like that very much. We didn't play with this rule yet, but you can, once units have been worn down, if you get similar types of units back together, you can split them, and you can also join them back up, which is nice. Monsters, artillery. So artillery have their own shooting table, and then magic items that will give benefits. And they also have a table of strange and catastrophic events. So if you want to make the battles a little bit more random and interesting, things like sniper, select an enemy unit, the officer in that unit immediately loses 1 point of health, conflicting reports, bad food, strange apparitions, ancient oathmark, hornet's nest, ancient treasure. Oh, that's right. And sometimes this can be triggered by failing certain things. Heroic charge, blessings of the ancestors, and a hero is born. So oathmarks. So to put it simply, an oathmark is a physical representation of an individual or a group's kingdom, nation, town, etc., loyalties to a specific leader or faction. This may take the form of a statue, a standing stone, a runic mark, a flag, or some other display of allegiance that can be thought of. If during a game the oathmark is required on the board, its base should be no larger than 6 by 6. Yeah, there are certain types of games where you're actually taking oathmarks, taking control of oathmarks. So here's the catastrophe events: meteor shower, fissure, cursed ground, dragon battle, dark sun, mystical storm, the land is alive, and a plague of locusts, volcanic eruption, and mark of death. Yeah, of course, all the tables are D10s. Very good. And a nice example of painted art for the North Star minis. So here we go, building an army. So this is where this game really sets itself apart and becomes much more interesting, and maybe a little more blasphemous to some very traditional players, because you can have armies with dwarves and elves units fighting alongside each other. All right, so you create a kingdom. So for your kingdom, you choose, so each kingdom has a terrain list. So first you choose a faction. So of course, dwarf, human, elf, and then goblin and orc. And let me just flip ahead real quick. This is what you use to keep track of your kingdom. And Chris did a really good explanation of this in our first learning game. So if you want to take a look at that stream, there's a great explanation of this. But basically, you chart out your kingdom, and whatever faction you choose as your starting faction goes in the center. And that gives you kind of the full range of so you can have a king of that faction, you can have princes, you can immediately have spellcasters, and much more deeper units of that faction. And then literally, so that would be your capital. But literally then you can add anything you want into these concentric rings. So based on what is starting here, that means that now you have access to level 2 dwarf, what are they called? Sorry, terrains. Yeah, so it's all terrain. So you're entering terrains. So this is your capital city, and then that means if this is dwarf, then you have dwarf level 2, dwarf level 3, dwarf level 4. Then they only go up to level 3, dwarf level 3. But if this is dwarf as your capital, and you want to put a human, what do they call them? A city, yeah. If you want to put a human city or an elf city here, you don't have access to the full list of units that somebody would have that had an elven capital, but you do have access to their basic units. And then as it continues here. So then you have non-faction, or wrong faction level 1, wrong faction level 2, wrong faction level 3. And you basically save the 5th ring for campaign because you can add and take away certain terrains there. So basically you're operating with one less level of terrain the further you go out. So that's 1 choice for the first, and then 2 choices, and then 3 and 3. So 3 and 4. And then a 5th ring again is 4. So what that does then, you can see in the terrain lists for the different factions, is they will list the city, and this is the first choice that you have to make, and then all of the units you get access to. The units with the asterisks are only available if this is your capital, if it's as the center. And then you'll see things like forges, mountain passes, lumber yards, and in parentheses is the level of these units. So immediately, or of these terrains, and so immediately you can put that in the 2nd ring or the 3rd ring based on the 3rd. But if you're then choosing things off of the human list, human terrain list, you can go with a city, but you lose that whole that whole first line of units. But the nice thing is you can kind of pick and choose and place within your kingdom these different terrains that give you access to. Then you have human cavalry, and if you look in the dwarves don't have any cavalry. So if you want cavalry, you'll have to go outside the dwarf faction and determine like who would work better. And then of course there are monsters that are specific to terrain of your faction, just like magic has a faction. There's faction only magic. And so this allows you to mix. You literally could have an army. It probably wouldn't be as effective, but you could go, have dwarf units, human units, elven units, and orc and goblin units all in the same army, depending on the types of things you wanted to go for. And if you look at the stat lines of the different units, they have their strengths and benefits, higher activation, higher armor, higher attack. There's a lot of differences. And then, of course, we have the unaligned terrain that give you access to gargoyles, bodash, dragon, or surmas. And these are all level 3, so they have to be on your 4th ring. Or I guess they don't. Yeah, they'd have to be at least on the 4th ring. But then you get monsters involved. So initially, when we were doing this, we were going to slowly develop the kingdom sheet, but only once you got beyond the first battle, it didn't seem to make sense. So we fleshed it all out, and also because the battle type that you're doing determines what's actually happening. So you literally, through a campaign, can be invading. If we go back to this, you can be invading another kingdom. So you will occupy territory. So if there's nothing here and you win a successful battle, you can actually be occupying here, and then on a next battle where it gives you the opportunity to move into another territory, you can keep occupying territories. And what that will do is in the next battle, this kingdom won't have access to those units if it's in an occupied territory. So you can kind of strategically take away cavalry or spell casting or something from the army you're facing. So it's a really fun and kind of very, very thematic and very like lore evoking or narrative evoking, like storytelling evoking way to play a campaign and kind of tend to be attacking each other. So it works very well. So here's their recommendations. So starting out, a quick beginner game, $550. A standard game is $2,500. Large game with large units, $4,000, and an epic clash is $6,500. So we started with a $550, which is a very small. I think it was basically like 3 units each. And the nice thing that they do too is the North Star miniatures boxes will basically give you a box of 30 miniatures. Gives you enough to play. 2 boxes would probably be ideal for making everything exactly the way you wanted it, as far as what weapons the units were carrying or what types of the weapons each of the units had to match their unit type. But it's done very well where 2 boxes and basically you can play a learning game, and the boxes are very affordable. So it's very, very nice. It's a very nice way to set up the system, and kind of gradually you can grow your way into bigger battles and into a deeper campaign. So it's really well constructed, very well thought out. And so here's the limitations. So your army may never contain more than 4 units composed of primarily the same figure types. So you can have 4 units of human soldiers, 2 units of spearmen, but you can't have 5 units of human soldiers. And then it does not carry across. So that's another reason to take a different faction, soldiers of different factions. If you want several soldiers and you need more than 4, then add some elf soldiers, a unit of elf soldiers. And also for figures, the 25 by 25 bases, this means that an army cannot contain, can only contain a maximum of 80 figures of this 80 of the same figure. So 4 units of 20 figures each. So the maximum is a row of 5 and then 4 ranks. So each unit can be maximum of 20 and 4 of those, so 80 of the same miniature. Which basically means the same figure equipped, the same way. All right, so let's take a quick look at the factions and the list of the different unit types. And then, so this is really nice because it tells you what terrain will give you this unit. So if you're flipping through and you're liking some ability or liking some high defense or something, then you can see what terrain you would need in your kingdom to add this unit. So in the dwarves, we have Dwarf King, Dwarf Prince, and they have the command to champion, shielding, and magic items. So they have a lot of abilities, but as you can see, they're also very expensive. 322 points, 165 points. Dwarf General, so still command and shielding. Dwarf Captain, command and shielding. Dwarf Champion, command, shielding, and magic item. Champion. So no command in the champion, but they do roll the champion die. Dwarf Spellcaster up to level 5. The Dwarf Soldier, which is a very basic unit with shielding, but dwarves have great high defense. Dwarf Spearman, so they have brace is the biggest difference. Almost the same price as soldiers, but they have brace to handle cavalry. Dwarven Archer has fire over. Dwarven Warrior has shielding, a little bit higher defense, and is a little bit more for that price, but they're wearing heavy armor. Oh, and also, that's the other thing in the details, it gives you equipment, so you know what the units should look like, the individual soldiers should look like in your unit. So it tells you what kind of armor they're wearing, one-handed, two-handed weapon, those sorts of things. So the warriors, and so you can simply see, I guess we talked about the higher defense and, but not as, the movement is 1 less too. So you're paying a little bit more for more durable but slower dwarves. So line breakers have the two-handed weapons. So of course no shielding, but they keep that high defense. Border guards are nimble, which allows them to move over terrains without slowing them down. And they can have hand weapons or ranged weapons. The militia, two-handed weapons, and they're very cheap, but they've got much less defense. Then light catapult, heavy catapult, and then the Indrik, the Etchi, and the Bargast are the dwarven monsters. The human list, you have human king, human prince, the human general, captain, and champion. So all of the factions will have those, and they vary a little bit in cost and abilities. And then the human spellcaster, 5 ranks of that, 5 levels. Human soldier, spearman, archer, warrior, line breaker. So very similar to the dwarven units. Militia ranger, mounted ranger. So there's a mounted figure on a 25 by 50. Then cavalry, and then heavy cavalry. So I haven't been against that yet. I'm not looking forward to that. So the biggest difference between human and dwarves are the cavalry and, the heavy cavalry have huge defense, 13. But the normal units are a little bit less than dwarves. Wow, that's insane. 13 defense. So light catapult for the humans, heavy catapult, and then humans get ogres. So they get ogres and ogre line breakers, and Bugain for one of their creatures, and then giants. And giants are 100 by 50s like dragons. So the elf list, elf king or queen, Hey, there wasn't queens listed in. Oh, interesting. Yeah. So the only the only multi-gender, the only co-ed factions are the elves, prince or princess, general, and captain. And so elves have really good activation and good defense as well. And of course, the 2-inch bow advantage. Elf champion, elf spellcaster, soldier, spearman, archers, warrior, linebreaker, ranger, and a lot of elves in the forest. Pathguard, which look like a little bit lower defense. Oh, this is so similar, yeah, to the dwarves that were nimble, kind of more ranger-like. And then cavalry, mounted rangers, and then huntmasters. So huntmasters can take dogs. Oh, no dogs. Hand weapons, dogs, none. All right, and then elven ballista, and then their monsters are the lindworm, the giant spider, and the wolver. And then the last kind of combined faction, the greenskins, I guess, the goblin and orc list. So goblin king, goblin advisor, general, captain, champion. So yeah, pretty similar, much more expensive, or not much more, but a little bit more expensive in some ways, but of course lower. If you look at the activations are 6, so compare that to 3, to rolling a 3 on a d10, a 6 is much harder to get away with. Spellcasters, and the flavored magic for the different factions is great because it's, like the goblin orc magic is much more evil and using their own units to attack you. And so it's very thematic. I think the faction magic is themed very well. So goblin soldier, goblin spearman, archer, and slave. So slave is dirt cheap unit, so very similar to Skaven maybe in fantasy. Dirt cheap, but also very hard to activate. So 7 is going to be difficult to pull off. And so they have slaves and then slave slingers, so they can give slings to them and they can do ranged. But if you look at their fight and shoot stats, they're both 0. So you need multiple ranks of these for them to have any sort of effect. Otherwise, you'll be rolling just the defense for your target number of your target, which is very difficult. An orc king, an orc prince, an orc general, and an orc captain. And there's some orcs. And the orc champion, spellcaster, soldier, and spearman. And then orc archers, warriors, linebreakers, and then they get wolves as well. And then goblins get wolf riders, wolf rider scouts, goblin light catapult, an orc heavy catapult. So the difference, I guess, yeah, they're just theming it by what crew they would have. There's some wolf riders. There's great, really great art in here. And then the monsters are trolls, knuckers, and then the unaligned would be gargoyles, bodash, I think we talked about, and then dragons. Yeah, a dragon. I really want to get to a dragon. A dwarven army with a dragon is sounds pretty amazing. And a surma. So they give you a description of what types of creatures, if you're not familiar with them, most of them are mythical creatures, from Europe. But if you're not familiar, they give you a description. And of course, you can use any miniatures, you kind of proxy any sort of monster miniatures you have. And here's the discussion of campaign. So the types of battles. To play, so determine the battle type, muster your army, select a scenario, fight the battle, and then record results. So here's the D10 table of battle types. Those types are deep strike, invasion, border strike, border clash, tutorial dispute, and punitive expedition. So all of these tell you how you're interacting with that kingdom chart and what's the kind of prize for winning, what's the benefit of winning, and what you lose if you're defeated in the battle. And there's a description of how to muster your army, and then select a scenario, or you can roll on the table. And the scenarios are spelled out very much like Frostgrave and things. They give you the setup and any special rules, and then what is the outcome. So there's pitched battle, which is what we played for our learning game, Oathmarks, and that's just whoever kills the most. Oathmarks and some heavily armored dwarves. Wind and rain. And that's it. So the 3 different, and they, of course, like I said, they expanded those scenarios tremendously through the I believe there are 3 or 4 expansions already for this game, so it's getting some great support. Appendix A is the special abilities, so those things listed on all the stat blocks. This is a description of what all of them do, so you can refer to them here. And more dwarves looking like militia. And then the spells. So first they give you the general spells, things like Courage or Crushing Blow, Dispel, Fireball. Fireball was pretty effective, and it's not that hard to cast. Fleetfoot, Heal, Looking Glass, Mystic Shield, Shift, and Smoke. And then dwarf spells. So Bracing. So basically a lot of protection spells, not a lot of attack. I guess Explosive Ammunition is pretty offensive. Elf spells, Confound, Glamour. So very thematic. Human spells, Afflict, Bells of Doom, Blade Mastery. And then the goblins and orcs, Battle Rage, Fury, Horrify, and Immolate. So you can take soldiers from a unit and basically they become a casualty, but then you can do a pretty strong attack. Basically, I think with their flaming body is what the intention is. So that's great. Very matches the faction well. Disposable goblins. So yeah, poison and knives. And there's a spellcaster for sure. And then magic items. So this is another list that grows throughout the expansions. But as you can see, there are quite a few points. But they give you interesting things like, adding an ability that maybe the unit didn't have, or regeneration, or spell casting, so up the spell casting level, or fire breathing. Or I guess no, give fire to a weapon. Yeah. Oh, and this was nice. The Cloak of Discorporation. So 100 points, very expensive, but if you wear it, you have the ability Discorporate, which means you can jump around the battlefield to 12 inches at a time every successful roll, which is only once per turn. There's some goblin slaves, which we'll be taking a look at very soon. And then here's the reference for maneuvers, terrain effects. So this is a nice thing to have, like basically a reference sheet for all the things you need to keep track of, and the tables for shooting and combat. So here's your kingdom sheet, like we were looking at before, that gives you your terrains and the concentric circles, and then an army roster. So this will just keep you from flipping around in the book. You just write the stat lines in and then how many of each. So it also helps with army building. You'll know how much a unit of that size is if you've previously used it. So yeah, great. Some really good stuff. And there's North Star miniatures. So speaking of North Star miniatures, we have a box we can take a look at. So let's just finish it up with so I think that's what we read in the inside. So Oathmark, created by Frostgrave designer Joseph A. McCullough, is a massive mass battle fantasy war game that puts you in command of a fantasy army you've always wanted, whether a company of stalwart dwarves or a mixed force of proud elves, noblemen, and wild goblins standing shoulder to shoulder in the battle line. Fight through an integrated campaign system and develop your realm from battle to battle, adding new territories, recruiting new troop types, and growing to eclipse your rivals, or lose what you fought hard to gain and fall as so many would-be emperors before you. So yeah, it's great. Very narrative, very nice narrative built into it without having a heavy setting. Like it's any setting. If you want to play old Warhammer, old world, you can use that flavor and those types of factions. Come up with something original or something inspired by your favorite fantasy book. All right, so that is, and it's a nice hardcover, just like the Frostgrave and Stargrave books. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in rank and flank fantasy battle games. It's a really nice, rules light, very refined system. So it plays really well. And so let's take a look at, although it is a miniatures agnostic game, there are official miniatures for it. So of course produced by North Star. And so I have a box of goblin slaves that I'll be putting together. So my dwarves, my dwarven army very quickly pulled together some cheap units from the camps, the slave camps on the goblin territory. So the terrain of slave camps gives you goblin slaves and slingers. So here is, you can see a nice tiny box, 30 multi-part hard plastic 28mm miniatures for Oathmark. And here is an example of what you get. So these are the goblin slaves. The weak, ill-disciplined, barely trained, and poorly equipped goblin slaves make up for their shortcomings by being numerous and expendable. Large units can swarm and hold up much more elite units, while their slingers fill the air with a hail of stones. This box set offers enough parts to build 30 goblin slaves for your Oathmark armies. These wretches can be armed with slings or hand weapons, and parts are also included to add banner bearers and officers to your ranks. Yeah, so there's lots of details you can see. There's whips and chains and all sorts of things to make them look abused and miserable. So so they're, of course, unpainted on sprue. Let's take a look at what you're actually getting here. So the first thing, we'll take these out, are the standard Oathmark bases, so the 25mm bases. So you get 20 of these. So I believe I've taken, actually I probably have added some of these, haven't I? Because I don't think I didn't need all of them. Yes, because you can build 30. So basically, 10. So yeah, so you'll get 3. You'll get enough bases to do all 30 in there. There was a little extra one in there because I have actually taken some of these off the sprue. Very nice standard, and they're already green. If you don't want to, if you're not painting anything, at least they look like they're standing on terrain. And then you get 6. So 6 identical sprues, but they're multi-part miniatures. So as you can see, you're going to get 5 bodies, and they all have a nice variety of pose. They're weighted or like leaning forward, leaning back. And then a whole range of 5 hand weapons. Then there's unarmed arms. There's whips and things for the officers. A standard with a pole with a skull. Here are your 5 slings. The nice thing, you can only build 5, but they give you a choice of 10 heads for every sprue. And then a lot of variation. Like I said, there's chains and whips and a shield if you want to build a champion. If you want to build a champion or an officer, you can give them a shield and a larger weapon, a shield and a whip, or something to distinguish them. Like I said, the officer should be distinguished in the front, the first rank center position. So from this sprue, you can build up to 20 or 30 total, but you can build a unit of 20 of anything you want, or 2 units of 15. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So I can build 20 slaves and 10 slingers if I wanted to, depending on. And so it's just the sheer combination of body and different arms, and then the 10 different heads gives you a really nice variation. So let's get a little bit closer here so you can see kind of everything. And the detail is really nice. So these guys are goblins, so they're short of stature. But the other thing you might notice is these are not heroic proportions, kind of heroic. I guess they're 28mm. They're more heroic scale, but they're not. They're more real. Look how thin the arms and the wrists are. They don't have fists the size of heads, and not big exaggerated weapons. These are more real world scale for everything. So they look really nice ranked up because they're not just all crammed into that 25 mil base. So to give you an example, I've already started putting these guys together. So this is a single rank of the goblin slaves. So there's the officer in the middle, and I gave him the standard. So this would be my front rank of my 5. And you've got a nice variety. So already just one version of each of them. So you can see you can change the position because they're multi-part, and you're putting arms on bodies. Whoops. You can, I've got them slightly magnetized. You can get a nice variety of pose as well. So this sling can be up or down, And so your ranks, if you do the full 20, you'll still have a decent variety. And because you've got 10 heads to choose from for each of your 5, you're not going to have 2 identical unless you really try. You're not going to have 2 identical if you don't want to. It's if you just take all the arms off and take all the heads off and kind of randomize them, it's going to be very hard to build the exact same soldier twice. So I like that a lot. And yeah, really great detail. They've got nice, open mouths and fangs and pointed ears and all kinds of crazy hairstyles. And so these can be equipped with just hand weapons, or I'm going to do slingers. So it's going to be a full unit of goblin slingers, which I can't actually afford yet in the points that we're doing. But yeah, they look great. They look great ranked up and are really easy to put together. The only thing I guess I would warn you about is they are puddle bases. So unless you want to take the time to cut them off to get them, more directly on the base, you're going to be basing with some material that'll kind of try to cover the lip of the base that they're on. But that also means that they are very much on these bases. They're not coming off. The puddle base, like that gives you quite a bit of material to adhere to the 25 millimeter square. So if you don't mind, having to build up a little bit of the sand or whatever you're basing with to kind of, cover the fact that there's a bit of a lip there. But that would be the only thing I would kind of warn you about that you may have not, if you played Mantic or Games Workshop, you may not be used to. Like I said, it's not slotted bases and things. But it gives them, the sculpts have a really nice pose, as you can see. Each of those 5 bodies, they're not standing very static. They each have a little bit of a different balance and how their body is postured. So depending on how the arms and heads are positioned, you can get a nice variety out of just that one sprue. So price wise, it's so confusing because it's different currency. So I believe these guys are based in England. So it's about $30, I think, US. So it's $1 a miniature. So, that's insane. I mean, that's a really great for something that's so customizable. It was just too tempting. Instead of trying to retrofit or kind of rework with some of the older miniatures I had, I thought if we're going to build our armies gradually, let's just go with the North Star miniatures. And they're really fun kits. They're really fun to build. So I would encourage you, if you don't have a huge preference or like, and also, like the a little bit more realistic proportioned fantasy characters, it does make the dwarves a little tall. That was the thing that I noticed. The dwarves are a little, thinner and taller, but I was trying to mix and match some, Mantic pieces and things I had. And when you put an old kind of classic fantasy head on these realistic proportions, it looks like they're wearing a paper mache, like, Mardi Gras head from a parade. So it's very, very ridiculous. So you really very easily see the realistic proportions. But I like this very much. I think they look really good ranked up. They're not crowding. They're not just these little clumps of, basically all the figures touching on there. You get a real good idea of individuals, and then removing them. It has a nice look as well. So there we go. So that is Oathmark, and please keep an eye on the channel if you're interested in this and you want to see more how it plays. We're going to be doing plenty more of this. So probably about a battle a month, and then we'll take the live stream of the battle report, and kind of edit it down so you can enjoy the more digested and just the action of the battle. Because especially for the learning game, we read a lot of rules and kind of very slowly, step by step, explained what we were doing. But this is Oathmark. If you are looking for something that is a nice modernized update of things from the 80s and 90s that you may have some love for, and you can dust off those square-based fantasy miniatures, or the Kings of War from Mantic, or any of the other miniatures that have been produced. The thing that they do, North Star does do, they have plastic kits. So they have these plastic kits of 30 units for not everything yet, but more and more of the standard units for each of the factions. And then for the specialty, the kings or champions, they do make metal. So you can have, kind of your named or your maybe units of one spellcasters and things. Those are still metal. So I would just warn you that those packs, so there'll be a little bit of difference between what's ranked. But if you're using movement trays and things too, it won't feel particularly different. So as I said, we're doing an escalation campaign for Oathmark. It's so far dwarves versus elves, but the dwarves are leaning heavily on goblins for this next match, so the next battle. And please subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see that. So you'll get a notification when we go live. That's both on Twitch and YouTube. And if you'd like to see more of what we're doing, please visit upturntable.com. And that's where all of our actual plays and reviews and everything that we do for the channel go. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Please like this video if you enjoyed this deep dive into Oathmark and taking a look at one of the boxes of miniatures. And we will be back soon with more. And give us a subscribe if you'd like to get notified of when we post new content. And also, if you would really like to tell us what more you'd want to see, new systems you want to try, or have some influence over our campaign and the units we take, consider becoming a patron. So patreon.com/upturntable. And we'll be back again soon. So tune into the weekly every Friday afternoon Japan time. So Thursday evening if you're on the other side of the world. And we'll do a little update on the news of tabletop then. So the weekly live, and that's Chris and I are who's playing Oathmark. So see you again next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.